The letter reached the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on a bitter cold morning in January 1897. It was written in the trembling handwriting of a mill foreman who apologized 3 times for his messy writing before finally explaining why he was writing. He told the story of a colored cleaning woman's daughter, about 13 years old, who had been found late at night inside the institute's engineering laboratory. She was standing in front of a blackboard filled with equations the faculty had failed to solve for 3 weeks. The girl had finished the proof. She had not copied it from anywhere. She had not guessed or stumbled onto the answer by chance. She had worked through 17 steps of advanced calculus and theoretical mechanics, problems that even graduate students could not solve. She used methods that did not appear in any textbook. The foreman, a practical man named Thomas Ricks, discovered her during his security rounds at 2 o'clock in the morning. Chalk dust covered her dark fingers. Tears were running down her face. When he demanded to know what she was doing, she whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. I just needed to fix it. The mathematics was wrong, and it was hurting my head to look at it broken like that." Professor Harrison Webb, the head of MIT's Applied Mathematics Department, had received hundreds of letters in his 30-year career claiming impossible discoveries or miraculous achievements. He burned most of them without reading beyond the first paragraph. But something about this letter made him pause. Maybe it was the foreman's clear discomfort with what he was claiming. Maybe it was the detailed description of the equations. Webb knew those equations well. His doctoral students had been struggling with them for weeks, while trying to prove a theoretical framework for calculating stress in suspension bridge cables under changing wind conditions. The mathematics required deep knowledge of calculus, physics, material science, and engineering principles that normally took years of university education to understand. The idea that a colored child, assumed to be uneducated, the daughter of a cleaning woman, could solve what his best students could not was absurd on the surface. And yet Thomas Ricks had carefully copied the girl's work from the blackboard before erasing it, as required by knightly procedure. The solution was enclosed with the letter, written neatly in Ricks's careful block letters. Webb checked it that afternoon. He checked it again that night. The next morning he showed it to 2 colleagues. The proof was correct. More than correct, it was elegant. It used an approach none of the faculty had considered, a way of seeing the problem that simplified what they had been overcomplicating. Whoever had written it understood mathematics beyond simple calculation. This was true mathematical intuition, the kind that could not be taught, only found in rare minds that could see the hidden structure of numbers and forces. The following week, Professor Webb traveled to Boston's South End carrying only a notebook, a pencil, and a skepticism that was already beginning to crack, before continuing with what happened when Webb found Lydia Johnson and her mother in their boarding house room. "I want to ask you something. If you are fascinated by hidden stories of brilliance that challenge everything we think we know about who deserves to be called a genius, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me what historical mystery you would like us to explore next. I am building something special here, a community that refuses to let these voices remain silent. Now let me tell you what Professor Webb discovered in that freezing boarding house and why it would eventually destroy everything he believed about the human mind. The South End in 1897 was where Boston placed the people it needed but preferred not to see. Irish immigrants crowded into tenements beside freed slaves and their children. All of them worked jobs that kept the city running while living in conditions that kept them invisible. The boarding house where Lydia Johnson lived with her mother, Clara, stood on a narrow street that never received direct sunlight. 4 stories of water-stained brick and broken shutters. The smell of cold smoke and boiled cabbage filled the stairwells like a permanent fog. Webb climbed to the 3rd floor, his expensive coat drawing suspicious looks from residents who recognized the clothing of someone from a different world. He found the room number Ricks had given him and knocked, painfully aware of how improper this visit was. A white professor, unmarried, calling on a colored woman and her child in a boarding house. If word reached the Institute's trustees, there would be questions. But curiosity had defeated propriety, that dangerous urge that drives men of science into places they are warned not to go. The woman who opened the door appeared to be around 35. Her face was worn from years of hard labor and constant worry. She wore a plain gray dress carefully patched at the elbows. Her hair was wrapped in a faded blue cloth. When she saw Webb, fear flickered across her face before she hid it behind careful politeness, the expression colored people had learned to show white authority. "Ma'am, I'm Professor Harrison Webb from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'm looking for Mrs. Clara Johnson." "I'm Clara Johnson, sir." Her voice was quiet, prepared for bad news, because visits from white men usually meant trouble. "Is your daughter here, Miss Lydia Johnson?" Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. "What is this about? Is she in trouble?" "Sir, if she did something wrong at the institute, I promise she won't go back. I told her to stay in the storage room while I clean, not to touch anything. Sometimes she wanders. Children get curious, it won't happen again. She's not in trouble, Mrs. Johnson. Quite the opposite. I need to speak with her about something she did." Those words drained the remaining color from Clara's face. She stepped back and opened the door wider, resigned to whatever was coming. The room was small, maybe 12 feet square, with one window faccia and a brick wall. A narrow bed stood against one wall. A small table with two mismatched chairs sat in the center. In the corner, a pile of blankets on the floor showed where the child slept. The room was spotless. The poverty was complete but carried with dignity. A colored girl sat at the table, focused on something in her lap. She was small for 13, thin in a way that suggested meals often skipped so her mother could eat. Her skin was dark brown. Her hair was braided tightly against her head. Her dress was a faded calico that had been let out many times as she grew. When she looked up at Webb, he saw her eyes, wide, dark, and deeply unsettling. They looked at him and through him at the same time, as if calculating something he could not see. "Lydia, this is Professor Webb from MIT. He wants to speak with you." Clara's voice carried a warning beneath the words. "Be respectful. Be small. Do not give them reasons." "Good afternoon, sir," Lydia said softly. She stood, placing aside what she had been holding, a piece of newspaper. Webb stepped closer. The newspaper showed an advertisement for farming equipment, but the margins were filled with tiny mathematical symbols, numbers, and notes written in pencil, so small they were almost unreadable. "Miss Johnson, I want to ask you about something that happened last Tuesday night at the Institute. Mr. Hicks found you in one of our laboratories. Do you remember?" "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry, sir. I know I shouldn't have been there. What were you doing?" "I was looking at the blackboard, sir. The one with the bridge equations." "Why?" She seemed confused by the question. "Because they were wrong, sir. The professors made a mistake in the third step, and everything after that was wrong, too. It was like a building with a broken foundation. I could see it would collapse." Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold room. "You could see the error?" "Yes, sir." "Can you explain what was wrong?" Lydia glanced at her mother for permission. Clara nodded slightly, unsure what was about to happen. They treated the wind force like it came from one direction. But wind doesn't behave that way. It twists and changes. You can't use a simple vector. You have to consider rotation and time. I watch the wind in the city. I see how it moves buildings and bridges. It's complex. She spoke as if describing something plainly visible. Webb took out his notebook. "Miss Johnson, I'm going to write down some problems. I want you to look at them and tell me if you can solve them." For the next 2 hours, in that freezing room, Harrison Webb conducted what would become one of the most important intellectual examinations of the 19th century. He began with simple arithmetic. Lydia answered instantly. He moved to algebra, geometry, trigonometry. She solved everything without hesitation, often giving answers before he finished writing. He advanced to calculus, differential equations, complex theoretical problems that troubled his graduate students. Lydia never slowed. She would glance at the page, her eyes moving in a way that suggested she saw beyond the symbols, then give the solution. Sometimes he asked her to explain how she saw it. She drew strange diagrams, visual models that were unfamiliar but perfectly logical. "Where did you learn this?" Webb asked after she solved a fluid dynamo. CS problem that had taken him days as a student. "I didn't learn it, sir. I just see it." "What do you mean you see it?" When I look at numbers, sir, I see shapes and patterns. Mathematics isn't symbols for me, it's like architecture in my head. I can see how forces balance, how systems work. With the bridge problem, I could see the bridge itself and how the math had to match reality. It made no sense, and it made complete sense. Webb had heard of savants, people with narrow talents who could calculate but not understand. Lydia was not that. She understood principles. She could explain and extend them. This was true genius. "Where did you learn physics and engineering?" Webb asked. "From watching, sir. Mama cleans at MIT 5 nights a week. I go with her. I stay in the supply closet, but sometimes I walk around. I read books left open. I look at machines. I see the math under everything." Clara finally spoke, her voice tight. "Is she wrong in the head, Professor? Other mothers say she's strange." Webb looked at a woman who cleaned other people's dirt and wondered if her child's brilliance was a sickness. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter is extraordinary," Clara cried. "Is that good or bad, sir? In a world built on the belief that colored people were inferior, what did this discovery mean?" "I don't know," Webb said honestly, "but I want to help her, and that was only the beginning." Finally, he turned to face his colleagues. "Gentlemen, I don't know how to say this gently, so I'll speak plainly. This is real genius. This isn't training, memorization, or some clever trick. This girl understands advanced mathematics at a level I rarely see even in doctoral students. She isn't just solving problems, she's showing true creative mathematical thinking." "Impossible," Thorne said flatly. "There must be another explanation. Some method she's using to create the appearance of understanding." "What explanation do you suggest?" Hamilton challenged. "That Professor Webb secretly trained her for months to solve thousands of possible problems so she could perform on command? That she somehow memorized methods for problems she's never seen? Be reasonable, Marcus. Sometimes the evidence forces us to change our theories. My theories are based on decades of cranial research, on measurements from thousands of specimens, on documented biological differences between races. Then perhaps your theories are wrong." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Thorne's face turned red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I will not have my life's work dismissed because of one anomaly. Science is about understanding the general rule, not being distracted by exceptions." "She's not an exception," Webb said sharply. "Or rather, she is, but not in the way you mean. She's an outlier in human thinking overall, not in Negro cognition specifically. What she proves is that the capacity for this level of genius exists across racial lines, that our ideas about fixed racial intelligence hierarchies are built on false assumptions. You want to overturn the entire scientific establishment because of one girl?" Thorne demanded. "I want to accept the truth based on the evidence in front of us. Isn't that what science is supposed to do?" The examination continued for another 3 hours, but the lines were already drawn. Hamilton and Cartwright, though clear, shaken by the implications, admitted that Lydia's abilities were real and extraordinary. The two MIT representatives hesitated, suggesting more study was needed before drawing conclusions, while Thorne grew increasingly aggressive, his questions shifting from scientific testing to interrogation. He demanded Lydia solve problems in her head without writing anything down, then accused her of using memory tricks when she succeeded. He presented deliberately unsolvable problems filled with contradictions, then accused her of being uncooperative when she pointed out the logical flaws. He began asking questions meant not to test her intelligence, but to shame her, asking about her living conditions, her mother's job, whether she had ever stolen books or sneaked into places she wasn't allowed. "Sir," Lydia finally said, her voice still calm but now edged with strength, "are you testing my mathematics, or are you trying to prove I'm a bad person who doesn't deserve it?" "I'm trying to determine whether you understand the seriousness of what's being claimed about you. Do you realize that recognizing your abilities would challenge core theories about racial capacity? I know exactly what you believe about people who look like me, sir. I've heard it my whole life. I've been told I'm inferior, that my brain is smaller, that I'm fit only for physical work, but mathematics doesn't care what you believe. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Whether a white man says it or a colored girl says it, the bridge equations don't change depending on who solves them. Truth exists whether it's convenient or not. The room fell completely silent. A 13-year-old Negro girl had just lectured a panel of white scientists on objective truth, using logic so simple there was no immediate answer. Thorne's face shifted through several shades of red. "You're impertinent." "I'm honest, sir. You asked a question and I answered it. You need to learn your place. I thought my place was sitting here solving whatever problems you gave me. That's what Professor Webb told me this examination was for. If you wanted silence and submission, you should have said that was being tested too." Webb felt torn between wanting to applaud and wanting to protect her. She was right, devastatingly right, but she was also a colored child speaking plainly to white men in authority, and that carried dangers mathematics could not shield her from. Hamilton cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a short recess. This has been an intense examination, and we should gather our thoughts before proceeding to physical measurements." Physical measurements. Webb's stomach dropped. He had been dreading this. Cranial measurement, the study of skull size and shape, was considered essential to intelligence research in 1897. Thorne would want to measure Lydia's head, compare it to his charts, and search for a physical explanation that wouldn't threaten his racial theories. There was no good outcome. If her measurements were ordinary, he would claim her abilities were fake. If they were unusual, she would become a specimen to be studied, poked, and possibly subjected to worse. During the recess, Webb found Clara in the hallway. She stood quickly when she saw him, her face tight with fear. "How is she doing?" "She's brilliant, Clara. She's proving everything we already knew, but that's making things worse." "What do you mean?" "Half the men in that room believe she's extraordinary. The other half are terrified of what that means. And frightened men are dangerous." Clara grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Professor Webb, if they try to hurt her, if they try to take her away, you have to help us escape. I can't let them turn my child into an exhibit. It won't come to that. You can't promise that. You're kind, Professor, I can tell. But you're one man, and they're the whole world. If the world decides Lydia must be silenced, what can one good man do?" It was the question that would haunt Webb for the rest of his life. When the panel reconvened, Thorne appeared calm again, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "We must proceed with anthropometric measurements, standard cranial protocol." He removed metal calipers from his bag. "Miss Johnson, please stand and come here." Lydia looked at Webb for guidance. He had none to give. She stepped forward, her small frame tense. "This won't hurt," Thorne said, though his tone suggested he didn't care if it did. "I'll be measuring aspects of your skull. Stay still." He pressed the calipers against her head, measuring from different angles while Cartwright recorded numbers. Cranial length, breadth, height, facial angles, proportions. The process lasted 20 minutes. Lydia didn't move, staring at a distant point, jaw tight. When Thorne finished, he studied his notes with clear frustration. The measurements fall within normal ranges for her age and sex. Cranial capacity appears adequate, though brain weight cannot be confirmed without dissection. The casual mention of dissection made Webb's blood run cold. "That won't be necessary," Webb snapped. "This is a living child, not a cadaver. Of course we cannot dissect a living subject," Thorne replied smoothly, "but it limits our ability to draw firm conclusions. There's nothing uncertain here. You watched her work for 5 hours. Evidence means nothing without theory. Yes, she performs calculations. But what does it mean? Is this true intelligence, or a savant condition? Is it isolated or hereditary? These are the real scientific questions. Those questions assume she's an object, not a human being who deserves education." "She's a Negro," Thorne said flatly. "Her education isn't my concern. The implications for racial intelligence are—" Hamilton spoke carefully. "Dr. Thorne, we must admit her abilities are genuine. The question is what we do next. We study her further, long-term testing, multiple examinations. This cannot be resolved today." You want to turn her into a permanent subject, Webb said. I want proper investigation. You want to remove her from her home, separate her from her mother, and make her entire life serve your curiosity. The argument grew louder. In the middle of it, Lydia stood silently as they debated her future like she wasn't there. Finally she spoke. Excuse me, sir. The room froze. I have a question. When is the right time? You've examined me for 7 hours, but no one asked what I want. What you want is irrelevant. I understand mathematics you studied for years. I taught myself to read. I'm 13 and colored, but I understand my own life. So I'll ask again. Does anyone care what I want? Hamilton asked gently, What do you want, Miss Johnson? I want to learn. I want books, teachers, problems. I want to build things that matter. I don't want to be locked away and studied like an animal. That's not scientific research. That's exactly what it is. You're afraid because if I'm real, everything you wrote is wrong. The silence was complete. Thorne's face darkened. You have no idea what you're saying. I understand enough to know you're scared. Mathematics doesn't care about fear. Either it's right or it isn't. Webb watched Thorne's face and saw decision, not defeat. Gentlemen, Thorne said calmly, I move, we conclude this examination. And so the trap quietly closed. Now he was getting ready to break into a private institution, take a child against state authority, and escape across state lines. Every instinct shaped by his orderly academic life screamed that this was wrong, illegal, career-ending. And yet, sitting in the trees and watching the sun drop behind Brightwater's stone walls, he knew with absolute certainty that it was right. At 8:14, Marcus checked his pocket watch. 1 minute, you remember the path? East entrance, 2nd floor, service stairs, 3rd floor, left hallway, 5th door. If anything goes wrong, if we're separated, you run. Don't wait for me. Get the girl and run. I'm not leaving without her, I know. That's what worries me. You're a good man, Professor, but good men aren't always good at the kind of ugly necessities that— The fire alarm exploded into sound. Bells clanged throughout Brightwater, the noise carrying across the grounds. Marcus moved instantly, crouching low as he ran toward the service entrance. Harrison followed, his breath sharp in his throat, his legs clumsy with adrenaline. Marcus reached the door, pulled out lock picks, worked for the RTY seconds that felt like hours. The lock clicked. They were inside. The interior was chaos, exactly as planned. Staff ran toward the alarm, guards shouted questions, patients cried out in confusion and fear. Harrison and Marcus moved against the flow, heading for the service stairs while everyone else rushed toward the supposed fire. Up the stairs, legs burning, lungs aching. 2nd floor. Keep going. 3rd floor. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and institutional. Doors on both sides. 5th door on the left. Harrison counted, his vision narrowing to that single goal. There. Room 307. He tried the handle, locked. The keys, he gasped. Nurse's station. Marcus was already moving, 20 feet down the corridor, reaching the cabinet Elizabeth had described. He forced it open with a crowbar, grabbed a ring of keys, ran back. 1st key wrong, 2nd wrong, 3rd key. The lock turned, the door opened, and Harrison Webb saw what had been done to Lydia Johnson. She sat on the bed, folded into herself, arms wrapped around her knees. She was thinner than before, her face hollow, her eyes too large. She wore a plain gray institutional gown, shapeless and cold. When the door opened, she flinched, pressing herself against the wall, her face showing pure terror before recognition slowly settled in. Professor Webb. Her voice sounded like it hadn't been used properly in weeks. Lydia, we're getting you out right now. Can you walk? I don't understand. How are— No time to explain. We have maybe 3 minutes before they realize the alarm is false. Can you walk? She nodded and stood unsteadily. Harrison moved to her, supporting her weight as they headed for the door. Marcus already checking both directions in the corridor. Clear. Move. They half-walked, half-carried Lydia toward the service stairs. Behind them, Harrison heard shouting. Someone yelling there was no fire, that it was a false alarm, that everyone should return to their posts. They reached the stairs and started down. Second floor. Keep moving. First floor. The service entrance was ahead. Still unlocked. Almost there. Almost. A guard appeared at the end of the hallway, confused at first, then alarmed. "Hey, what are you doing with that patient?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged the guard, slamming into his midsection and driving him back against the wall. The guard struggled, reaching for a whistle. Marcus struck him again, hard and brutal, dropping him to the floor, unconscious or stunned. "Go!" Marcus shouted. "I'll hold them here. Get her out." Harrison ran, supporting Lydia, bursting through the service entrance into the cool evening air. Behind them, whistles blew. Voices shouted. The facility woke to the realization that someone had broken in. He ran for the wall, pulling Lydia with him. She was gasping, her legs weak, but she kept moving. At the wall, Harrison locked his fingers together. "Step here. I'll boost you." She placed her foot in his hands. He lifted, straining, raising her high enough to grab the top. She pulled herself up with strength that seemed impossible, driven by sheer will. Then she was over, dropping down the other side. Harrison grabbed the top of the wall and pulled himself up. His arms screamed. For a terrible moment he thought he wouldn't make it. Then adrenaline carried him through. He rolled over and dropped hard, twisting his ankle pain. Fully. Lydia grabbed his arm. "Come on." They ran into the trees, branches cutting their faces, roots catching their feet. Behind them, guards climbed the wall, but the dense darkness of the forest gave cover. They had maybe 2 minutes. They ran for the road where Clara waited with the wagon. 200 yards, 150. Then the road appeared, and the wagon, and Clara jumping down, her face transforming when she saw her child. "Mama!" Lydia's voice broke. She stumbled forward, collapsing into her mother's arms. Both of them sobbed. In the wagon, Harrison gasped. "They're right behind us." Clara lifted Lydia into the wagon bed and climbed in after her. Harrison pulled himself onto the driver's bench, grabbed the reins, snapped them hard. The horse surged forward, slow at first, then faster, pulling them away from Brightwater, away from pursuit, away from the place that had tried to break a brilliant child's mind. They drove through the night, changing roads often, heading northeast toward Connecticut. Every sound made Harrison flinch. Every distant rider felt like capture. But as hours passed with no pursuit, hope crept in. At dawn, they reached the Safe House, a Quaker farm whose owners asked no questions. Clara and Lydia were given a room. Harrison collapsed into a chair, completely exhausted. But they had done it. Against law and authority, against men like Thorne, they had saved one girl. Later that morning, Lydia asked to speak with him alone. They sat in the kitchen while Clara bathed upstairs. Lydia's eyes looked years older. "Professor Webb, I need to tell you what Dr. Thorne planned. The definitive test. You don't need to talk about hat now. You're safe. No. You need to know what you saved me from." She took a shaking breath. "He was going to operate on my brain." The room tilted. "What?" He said it was the only way to understand my abilities. He said the tests were inconclusive. He described opening my skull, removing pieces of my brain, mapping them. He said I would probably die, but that it was acceptable for science. She cried silently now. He said my death would settle the question of racial intelligence forever. He spoke like he was being kind, like he was doing me a favor, because to him I wasn't a person, I was a specimen. Harrison pulled her into his arms. "He will never touch you again. I promise. We're taking you somewhere he can't reach. You'll be free to learn and grow, and he'll live knowing the proof escaped him. Do you think he'll stop looking? He'll try. But the world is big. You'll vanish into it so completely that Marcus Thorne will search forever and never find you." For the first time, Lydia smiled, small, fierce. They hadn't broken what mattered. They crossed into Canada on July 2nd, 1897, using forged documents. The guards barely looked at them, and just like that, Harrison Webb ceased to exist. John Miller took his place. Toronto became their refuge. Lydia healed slowly. Her body recovered first. Her mind took longer. Mathematics frightened her now. The thing that once saved her had been poisoned. "I can't see it anymore," she said months later. "The patterns are gone. He broke something in me." "You're still you," Harrison told her. "Trauma doesn't erase worth." The breakthrough came months later at a construction site. She saw the forces again. The math returned. Slowly, painfully, but stronger. By 14, she surpassed Harrison. New teachers were needed. Morrison was the first. He tested her once and knew. She's not just talented, he said, she's exceptional. But the world was not ready for her, so they chose secrecy. Her work would be published under Harrison's name. She would be invisible so the math could live. Will anyone ever know? Someday, Harrison promised. Years passed, papers were published. Lydia's mind reshaped entire fields, and she was erased. Then Thorne published his book. He lied. He rewrote her as damaged, defective, institutionalized. And because Lydia was silent, his lie became record. We can't fight this, Harrison said. Not without destroying you. So they endured. Lydia withdrew. Her mother watched her fade. After Clara died in 1918, something in Lydia broke. She stopped working. She questioned everything. What's the point if I don't exist? Harrison had no answer. Before his death, he sealed the truth in a box to be opened 50 years later. But the box was lost, forgotten. Lydia disappeared. History assumed she died young. In 2009, a graduate student found her, not alive but real. Sarah Miller, seamstress, quiet, genius. Notebooks proved it. Decades of work ahead of its time. In 2012, her story was finally told. Some celebrated, others denied. The arguments continued, because the system was never built to see someone like her. Lydia Johnson existed. She was brilliant. She mattered. And the fact that we almost forgot her should terrify us into asking who we are forgetting now.